Dum, 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 dum. Check, check, check. All right, cool. I'm just gonna wait a second here and see if anybody joins us. We're a minute ahead of schedule. Did anybody tweet us?
I didn't see any tweets.
Okay.
There you are.
When is spring gonna come? I haven't spent a summer in Boston yet. Ooh, 3 viewers. Welcome.
You're talking about spring. I love it.
Okay, so there were a few questions that were posted on the Facebook event page. And then you can also ask a question from the event. If you're watching the YouTube link, it should prompt you to do that. If you're, it's like join the conversation here, you should see some sort of a prompt from the YouTube link, or else you could just type it into the event. So feel free to ask questions. Cody's watching, he'll let me know, or on the Facebook event, or tweet us, whatever you want to do. And hopefully we'll get to answering a lot of different types of questions. There's quite a variety that we have already. Okay, let's just get right to it. Let's get on this Facebook event page. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to start from one that's a little bit more general, and then we'll move over to more specific stuff. Okay, so somebody asks, I don't know how to say your name right, so I'm going to butcher this, but I believe it's Ninad, has asked, can you share with us your process of channeling ideas into music and something about the way you speak your mind? You seem to be very good at it. First of all, thank you. I try. How do you channel your ideas into music? There's a word that we use in the songwriting department at Berklee, like all day, every day. And it's almost like a parody of itself at this point, but it's a word called prosody. And I'm pretty sure that's a word we made up. And it means a lot of different things, but at the very end of the day, I believe that what it means is the connection of your ideas to art, or when art imitates life, or the interconnectedness of an idea being expressed through art. So a good example of this would be, let's say you're writing a song about love, and a way to rhythmically interpret love would to use a heartbeat rhythm, let's say. Dun, 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 dun. And so you're saying heart or love or feelings without actually saying that, right? So in a way, I have an idea, somebody I love very much, I want to write a song about them. So I'm going to translate that into music by thinking of, how can I say something rhythmically, melodically, harmonically? How do you say love harmonically? It depends on what type of love it is, but if it's a stable, solid love, maybe it's a song about how much you love your parents and how much they supported you, you'd probably want to use some pretty stable harmonic movement, like the tonic chord or dominant to tonic, stuff like that. So it can really manifest itself a number of ways. You just have to kind of think, open your mind. It's like, I want to say X, Y, and Z. All right, so how do I musically do that? And when you have access to digital technologies, the realm just opens wide up. You know, if it's a song about loneliness, then use of reverb can be really effective, because it gives it this sense of space, large or small space. It's like it puts you in a room, and that can also say a lot without you really having to say, I'm alone in a large room. It's a reverb, or with delays, or different types of anything really. The way you manipulate the frequency spectrum can say a lot. So when I'm composing, I really try to look for those moments where I can inject prosody into anything. As a producer, as a writer, And I actually think that that's one of the things that I've drawn on the most from my songwriting background is this idea of interconnectedness. How do we connect our ideas with the music that we're making? And that's the kind of music I gravitate towards, is things that have that deeper layer and kind of like substance to them. If it's really cookie cutter and surface, I don't typically like it for the same reasons. So I just keep trying that, and eventually you get better and better and better. You know, it's like, how many times have I gone through an exercise of asking myself, how would I do X, Y, and Z? I've done that a lot of times. And so it's just something that you get better at every single day. So I hope that was a good answer. Let's see what else we have here. Okay. All right. Same person asked this a new question. Logic has been the center of my studio setup for many years, and I'm really happy with it. Reason I want to explore Ableton is to add it to my stage performance setup and in studio to rewire it, Logic, and explore nonlinear arrangement approach. Can you tell us something more about your stage performance setup with Ableton and creative use of Ableton Rewire with other DAWs? Yeah, definitely. This is a great question, because I get a lot of people asking me, like, why Ableton or why Logic, Pro Tools, Reason, any of the many choices you have for DAWs to use these days. And I think that the combination of a nonlinear DAW and a linear DAW is very powerful, specifically Logic or Pro Tools in conjunction with Ableton. Pro Tools doesn't work as well with Ableton as I would like it to, because I think that you can only slave to Pro Tools. You can't slave Pro Tools to Ableton. It's only the other way around. But Logic you can slave or master, and Ableton also is bidirectional. So the idea, you know, working in a linear DAW is what you want to do sometimes. If you are tracking vocals, if you're recording multiple takes of people playing in the room at the exact same time, and then edit those takes together into composite tracks, you're going to want to work in a linear DAW, and Logic and Pro Tools are the right choice for that. So people love to use Ableton for the reasons that you want to, because of this nonlinear compositional approach, using it on stage, a lot of the creative MIDI and audio effects devices, which have no utility to them. They really just are creative effects. That's why people want to enter Ableton. So having both things simultaneously is a really attractive idea. And, you know, a lot of times you end up having to bounce between DAWs. I do that a lot. I use Melodyne a lot too. So I'll track audio in Pro Tools, edit, pitch correct in Melodyne, and then go into Ableton. And I probably started in Ableton where I composed, moved to Pro Tools, moved to Melodyne, back to Ableton or Logic. So the idea of Rewire is that you can actually receive audio from one DAW. Let's say I do this a lot with Reason, and you pull that in to Ableton. So I used to really like doing sound design in Reason, and I would just send audio from Reason into Logic. Let me just show you. I believe that if I tried to do that right now, I may have quite a CPU situation on my hands. But, oh, all of those things, that's crazy. I could just broadcast a sticky. Why? Sorry, guys. Okay, entire screen. Oh, wait, there we go. Okay, cool. So I actually have this set up for another situation. But if you're in the IO and you have Rewire enabled, which you should be able to do in your preferences somewhere, you can turn this on and off. I can't remember because I already turned it on, and so I don't have to turn it off. Do you know where Rewire is, where you enable Rewire? Oh, there it is. Multi-core, multiprocessor support for CPU. And then we hear Rewire, on, off. So sometimes, this has happened to me once before. If you open Pro Tools and Ableton at the same time, Pro Tools will rewrite some of the Python code inside of the API for Ableton, and it will disable Rewire. And you actually have to go in and delete whatever it rewrote in order to get it to work again. So when you start Ableton and say Rewire is not functioning, Google that. Google what I just said of fixing the Python code in order to get Rewire to start. But this is a problem a lot of people are having with some recent updates. But let's say I'm here in Audio 5 and I want to receive audio from, you can see I've got Melodyne and Reason and some wave stuff actually set up so that I can just receive audio from Reason into this audio track and then record them into these clips here, whichever I want, so I can have the sounds or the virtual instruments that I rely upon or I love, and I can send that audio directly into Ableton and still use this nonlinear compositional workflow. I do not rewire live on stage. It's especially because my live sets are really big and there's a lot of stuff going on. So I want to limit the amount of DSP or CPU usage. So if I'm running 2 programs simultaneously, I'm just kind of setting myself up for a disaster. And then there's another piece of software to deal with. And when you're troubleshooting live on stage, you want to kind of like streamline as much as you possibly can. So I only really rewire when I'm composing. And the other thing that is limiting about this is that you can only receive audio. I do not believe you can receive MIDI from Reason. Or like you can't receive MIDI from machine. You can only receive audio. So it's limiting in that way. It depends on what you want to do exactly, but that can streamline things if you're just generating audio from another DAW and sending it into Ableton. You can record it in anywhere here also. And for specifics on how to set Rewire up, I would do a Google search. Let me stop sharing here, and then I'll just share my whole screen. Entire screen will be better. Okay. Let's go here. So I would say Rewire Logic X Ableton. And then you'll get some really specific information on how to rewire live with Logic Pro 9. Well, this one's maybe not so recent, but Logic Pro X Ableton 9 Rewire. Just Google one of these videos and have somebody walk you through the process for each DAW, because it's different and you have to set it up in both softwares in order for it to communicate properly. So it can become like a little convoluted depending on how savvy you are with using some of these technologies. Okay, and then the other question was about my stage performance setup with Ableton and creative use of Ableton and Rewire. So I'll show you my live set. That should be cool. I just had it open the other day, so I was doing this for a classroom. Don't save that. Let's take a moment to open. The session is big. I just looked at it the other day. I think it's like 6 gigs. Okay, this is my live set. And I have this compartmentalized in a way that is really specific to me. When I'm working with other artists, I don't always suggest that they do it like this. But for me, this is what I do. So I always have a lead vocal over here, which is monitoring in, and I don't have an interface connected right now, so you're not seeing signal come through. But monitoring in means that I'm always going to hear what's happening in that track, whether or not I'm record enabled or recording. It's just always going to be monitoring. And on that lead vocal, I have an EQ, an RDSer, this dynamic tube effect, and then this compressor I kind of turn on or off depending on the situation. Live compression can cause a lot of feedback, so I try to be as discriminating as I can when I do that. And then my set moves right to left and then up to down. So this is the first song. You would usually see a red or yellow box around a part of this matrix, which is representing where my push is plugged in. I don't want to plug it in because I'd have to move around a lot to do that. Okay, and then I close this as I go. So different songs have different groups that just collapse into themselves. So I've got my first song here and my first scene, which has the BPM markings. Then during the course of this song, I'm working just in this track. And then you can see if I launch this next one here, there's some follow actions. This just keeps continuing to happen. So some of the things are predetermined and others are not. And then once I hit the end of this song, down here, and then I go into these transition scenes, which have different BPMs. And actually on this, I have this side chained to my vocal, which nothing's coming in right now. But basically what happens, it's like a broadcast radio situation where when I talk, the track ducks. And then I can talk to people while I change I can navigate over to the next part of my set and kind of keep talking to people and then there's never a moment of silence in the set. It's very much like a DJ set. And then I just keep going. I've got all my BPM information over here. And so you can see in this sections where I've got some live looping tracks set up for myself. And here's the third song over here. Some things I program in, some things are pre-programmed. I don't do a lot of follow actions, maybe just like 1 or 2 per set. I really like to be in charge of when the form changes. Yeah, and then it just, so you can see right to left, up to down is how I set up my stuff. And then each of these will have different effects on them that I may mess with live. And that's how I do it. But I've had a lot of clients who just want to launch things. And if that's the case, I'll just, 2 tracks is sometimes enough for some people. And I don't need to push it any further than that. And it really depends on if you're going to be doing anything to those tracks live. If they're just there for playback or you're launching things, even with a specific follow action or not, a lot of times you can really overcomplicate things. So I've done what I can to take some of the stress off of myself, but also maintain a good amount of, ability to manipulate things live. And it takes a while to really decide what that means for you, if you know what I mean. Okay. Feel free to ask questions too. I don't know if this is, yeah. Nobody's asking anything, right? No?
No, it seems like the Q&A app, like I can access it, but I'm not seeing a place.
You ask a question, see if it works.
Right, that's the issue. I'm not seeing a place to like input questions.
WTF, dudes. Questions. Loading. I want you to be able, there was a problem contacting the server. That's fun. If you have a question, post it in the event page on Facebook, and Cody can let me know what's going on over there. Okay. Back to where we were. Okay. Recording sounds, car, machines, birds, people, and process in a synthesizer. Actually, maybe it would be cool to show you guys a little bit about how to sample simpler. I don't know if you guys have checked out simpler since the 9.5 update, but it is pretty cool. So I'm going to answer Lisa's question. Hey, Lisa. She says, often I don't decide on the BPM of a composition until midway through the composing. How do I change the global BPM so that it represents the composition after I've created the song? Here's an example. I have a composition that is 80 BPM, but the global BPM says that it's 120. When I change the global BPM to 80, it slows down the composition to less than 80. So I think what's happening here, let me switch back over to sharing my screen. Share the entire screen. Okay. So up here is the global BPM. We'll call it that. So I have this at 50 right now, but if we go into, let's say this is inside of that scene, right? This is just a stab, and it's telling me the segment BPM for this is 111. So those BPMs don't match up. Even if I doubled 50, I mean, it's still just 100, it's not 111. So how do these numbers correlate to each other, and how do they work with each other? And over here, right, this one says 115, but the scene I actually have at 170 BPM. So when Ableton receives a file, it's going to do its due diligence to help you determine what the BPM is. And this segment BPM, it will actually even change depending on where I am inside. You can see now it says 110.37. And if I'm playing something, sometimes it can change itself depending on what I click on. Now it says 115.05 if I clicked on that transient. 108.11. So it's kind of like neither here nor there what this number in the segment BPM is. As long as when you're playing it back, it's lined up to a click, then you're good, right? And trying to overthink how these numbers correlate to each other can actually prevent you from warping something properly. So I guess I'm confused because it feels like if your song's at 80, but then your global tempo's at 120, like that doesn't line up from the get-go. So I feel like maybe you're not recording something to a click, or you're not sequencing something to a grid that you predetermined. Because the great thing about Ableton is that, you know, say if I launch this, this is warped, right? So if I turn this up or turn this way down, it's going to follow because this has already been snapped to a grid. And every time I sequence something in MIDI, it's to a grid. So as long as you're snapped into a grid, then you can always go and change the BPM in post to whatever it is that you want it to be. But if you didn't properly have everything aligned to some BPM, right? Like you might not know exactly what BPM you want to be working at in the beginning, but you do want to make sure that you're constantly on a grid of some sort so that you can make those kind of macro adjustments to make something much faster or much slower afterwards. And then it's also not going to mess with the pitch. So you might be getting that as well. It really depends on how you got to where you're at. So with that, without clearly seeing it, it's going to be hard for me to say for certain how to help you. But starting from the right place will be instrumental in being able to adjust the tempo of things overall. And you always have this tap tempo function over here too if you want to tap it out and not decide on a number. So like, oh yeah, okay, I'm feeling it right here. Tap, 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 tap. Okay, 92.29. I like that. It's a palindrome. So maybe that's just where I want to start, and I'll then turn my metronome on and make sure that I'm at least recording to this click. And then as long as I've done that, then I can change this number up here and everything will move accordingly. and whatever's in here just won't matter. You see, even I just clicked on it and it changed. This number constantly changes. So you just have to, it's kind of a game you have to play with yourself, right? Math and your ears. You have to use your eyes, your ears, and your brain. And warping is one of those things that just takes a minute for people to kind of warp their, I wanted to make a pun, but didn't wrap their heads around. Next time, I'm gonna get that pun right. Okay, stop sharing. Yes, I want the question thing to work. I don't have, my internet's working, obviously, because we're here together.
I'm reading something that says maybe you have to enable it before.
I did do that. I did, because I've not enabled it before. And so it's on.
It's Google's fault.
You know what else we could do? I don't know if this is, can you see if there's a, oh, if you can reach back there, there's a Ethernet cable that's hardwired in.
This blue one.
Yeah. Sorry, it's like kind of a. Okay, sweet, thank you. Perhaps this will help. All right, cool. So I can't even type anything in here either. Ask your Q&A. Load it. Loading questions. Well, anyways, if you're just here right now, there was a problem contact. Okay, so maybe it's Google server. If it's a server, I'm just gonna blame Google. But if you just came and you're wondering how to ask something, go to the Facebook event page or tweet #BerkeleyAL, and we will see it. Cody's gonna see it and tell me what's going on, and that will be awesome. Okay, so we had some really interesting questions about EQ, actually, some more detailed things. Okay. Would it be possible for you to elaborate on some of the fundamentals of MidSide EQ? I'm having some trouble grasping it. Thanks. Absolutely. So MidSide EQing is more of a advanced EQing technique, but if you want to make certain types of music, or if you're a mastering engineer, it's really important to know how it works. So for instance, bass music is going to be really muddy unless you kind of address the frequency spectrum in a more dynamic or dimensional respect. So even before I enter into the DAW to show you this, let's just talk about the general idea of what MidSide EQ might be. So if this is the frequency spectrum, is this the low side? Yeah. I don't know if it's reversed when you're looking at me, but I think this is right. Here's the low frequencies over here is 20 hertz. And then up here, we've got 20,000 hertz. This is the total range of human hearing, right? So down here, right below like 100 hertz, 60 hertz, the very lowest of the lows is a lot of rumble and kind of just noise. So a lot of times you want to cut those frequencies out, even if it's a sub synthesizer or an 808 kick drum, that you actually, you know, it seems kind of counterintuitive because you want that boomy boom. But the stuff that's at the very end, we can't even really clearly hear that anyway. So all it's doing is adding a lot of rumble. So if you make music that is bass heavy and has like a kick drum rhythmic drive to it, a lot of times you're going to want to manage that frequency, that side of the frequency spectrum a little bit differently than everything else. So it's really typical to take a bass part and EQ it so that it's only on the sides, right? And then maybe leave some space in the middle and then have the kick drum be right in the middle, or vice versa. Keep the bass in the middle and have the kick drums on the side. And this isn't necessarily about panning them. It's about where the frequency spectrums live, right? So you have your bass, ultimately you probably want that smack dab in the middle, right? But then on the sides is where you're going to actually let the low frequencies come through more, and then you dip them in the middle so that you're leaving space to have those kick drum frequencies right in the middle, right? So it can really become confusing quickly. But I will go in, and actually Cody and I just had a discussion about whether or not when I MidSide EQ'd something, if it would run through a YouTube video feed and like come back to you on your side the way that I can hear it. I don't know if you'd be able to hear it, but I'm going to show it to you. So let's do this again. Going into Ableton, share. I'm going to go into this other session here. Actually, maybe I have a good baseline. I'll just use this. No, I'm going to go back to this session. Sorry. Okay, we'll do it on this drum rack. Since there's very little going on in here, it might be a little bit easier. Okay, so I've got a drum rack and a utility on this, and I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna grab this EQ8 and throw it at the end of the chain there. So pull this up. You can see all the frequencies coming through here, and this is that low end rumble that I was talking about actually. So right now the EQ is in stereo mode, and you can see over here I've got mode stereo selected. Then I also have left right, or I have mid-side. So I'm going into mid-side mode here, and then depending on what I want to edit, I'm going to select mid or side. So we've got a red line or a yellow line to differentiate between the mids and the sides. Very interesting. So if I'm in the middle here, let's say I actually want to just completely cut those bad boys out. Is this what band am I on? This is band number 1. And I want to go like so. Why is this not coming through over there? So I band 3, 4, 5, 6 selected. Maybe I have to do this the opposite way. So I'm going to cut just like that in general. It's what you kind of always want to do in order to cut out the low, 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 low action. And if I go to the sides here, so I had all the low stuff right in the middle. And then I'm going to choose band 3 here, and I'm going to cut out all the lows from the on the sides. Yeah, it's really difficult to hear, especially if we don't juxtapose something. But a lot of times you want to do opposing slopes. We go 5, hard knee over here. A lot of times it looks like this for basses. What I don't understand is why I'm not hearing the other side. Anyways, this is what it can look like for basses. You want to have certain things on the sides and then have only the other part of the frequency spectrum right in the middle. And you can do this for left, right also. So that you can hear really clearly. That's nuts. So if you're listening to this right now, you can actually hear that the bass is still in the middle, but I've actually, the left side here is what I'm looking at. All the, like, the attack on the kick drum is on the left side now, and all the boomy part of the kick drum is on the right side right now. So this does have something to do with the stereo field, and it's hard to listen to or to hear in the beginning. So a lot of, if you go into the audio effects rack here and you go into the mixing and mastering presets, if I go onto the master, I have nothing on the master right now. Let's see, I'm gonna go wide and warm master. So here on this EQ8, you can see that on the sides, we're actually boosting the mids, and in the middle, it's like dipping them slightly. But so mastering engineers, when you're thinking about a 2-track as a whole of what's happening, a lot of that has to do with MidSide EQ, and that's like originally why people were MidSide EQing things. And now as time goes on and everybody has access to these tools, electronic musicians are using them for different reasons and different applications, which is what we do. So now we're seeing it a lot in bass music or just anything that has a lot of low end, in order to make it clear and warm. Like if you listen to dubstep in general, there's a lot of growl and a lot of rumble and noise. And the only way to kind of get that loudness without having it be so overly muddy and loud, you have to go in and really do surgery on the low end. Where do things belong? How are you going to adjust them and handle them? And it's hard. The low frequencies are the hardest. In my opinion, EQing basses and kick drums is the hardest of all things to EQ. All right, does anybody want anything?
Yeah, we got a question about controllers. Gerard asks, I'm using an old Yamaha DX11 as a controller. Would it make it a lot better to use a more modern one?
What's the name of the controller? Let's look it up.
The Yamaha DX11.
Yamaha DX11. It sounds cool.
The first result is vintagesynth.com.
Vintage Synth Explorer. Digital synthesizer. Oh. All right, so I'm assuming that the back side of this is sending MIDI through like a actual MIDI cable, 5-pin MIDI cable. I got pictures of the back. When was this made? 1987. This is from the 80s. This is cool. Okay, this is an interesting question. So the question is, would he benefit from something that's more
modern?
More modern?
Would it be better to use something more newer?
I guess it totally depends on what it is you're trying to do. I don't think better is really the case. Maybe easier, more functionality, yeah. I mean, those old synths, what's cool about that is there's probably a lot of onboard sounds and they probably sound better than what's in the native Ableton library. And I don't know if you're using it with, like, let's say you're using it to perform a massive patch or FM8 or something. You know, it really depends on what it is you're doing. But the newer controllers, especially Ableton dedicated controllers, have a lot of inherent functionality that old school MIDI, the keyboard controllers, they don't have. You know, you're not going to have the inherent launching functionality of a launch pad or a push or an APC. And also, you know, it depends on what kind of a music maker you are. If you're really savvy with playing things on keys, like you program your drums on keys and that's all you need, then you don't need another controller. But if you are interested in messing with knobs and faders and pads, then yeah, a newer controller has a lot more to offer in terms of inherent functionality. And that device also probably only runs via 5-pin MIDI. And a lot of the newer controllers, they just use USB MIDI cables. Actually, I can't even remember the last time I saw or used a 5-pin MIDI cable. They're like dinosaurs in a way, except if you're using old analog or vintage digital gear. So, you know, in order to get MIDI from that connection or that output on your digital synth into your computer, you have to use an additional box or some sort of something that will input and take that MIDI information and send it to your computer. So I believe that's the case with that controller, since it was, I mean, the synthesizer was made, what is it, 87 or something?
Yeah, it's got a 5-pin on the back.
Yeah, so that's the only real like drawback that I see in terms of the hardware, is that you can't send USB MIDI. So like moving that thing around or dealing with it, you just have more stuff, more cables. So, I mean, that's a synthesizer. So it's not necessarily a controller. I mean, it is sending MIDI data and you're using MIDI in order to create the performance, but at the core, that piece of hardware is a synthesizer. It's not a MIDI controller, I would say.
So that leads me to ask this question.
Okay.
What's the difference between a controller that is natively supported by Ableton and one that isn't?
You mean like a dedicated controller?
Yeah, or one that has like all of these like native supports that when you drop down from MIDI preferences and you can tell Ableton what it is, or if it's not on this list, but you can still use it.
Right, so like it's the same thing for Logic. There's just a list of supported controllers that every software uses. So like, for instance, I've been using Roly a lot. See, they have like all the Akai stuff is supported, Alesis, but that's only like a few of their controllers too, or the Korgs. There's just they'll have inherent language that's written into Ableton that immediately communicates with certain controllers, and other ones are not listed. It doesn't mean you can't use them. And in Logic, this is actually much more complicated in order to link another controller. Usually, whether or not it's listed, it'll still pop up on the MIDI preferences menu. It'll say like, oh, you've got a Roly attached. And I just say, yes, remote on. And then it tends to work. But you can lose certain stuff. Like what was I using? A flying fader the other day. It was from the 90s or something. And God, who makes that? Flying fader. Yeah, it was just a single Martin sound. Yeah, so I had never heard of these people, and it was just at a studio, and I wanted to use the flying fader. And so I actually had to go through a pretty long process in order to get that to work, because it needed a firmware update, and I needed new drivers just in order to get this thing to work. And it wasn't listed as a native controller, or it wasn't supported natively, but I still got it to work. So, I mean, the real difference is that whoever the developers and the manufacturers, Ableton and whoever the third-party person is, got together and exchanged information about certain things, and then it just immediately works. And the other controllers have not gone through that process of communicating from developer to manufacturer. So it doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means that you probably will have to take another step, which more often than not will be the case, because how many controllers are there out there, and only 40 or 50 are listed, something like that. New ones coming out all the time. Is there anything else?
Yep, we have a Twitter question here from @GoHereNow. Says, if you do a live show with Ableton, how do you incorporate a live microphone? Also, how do you get the levels right?
Okay, so I'm going to go back and show you my live set. I think it's still open. Share the screen. Sharing it. Okay, so I'll show you guys this again. This is the lead vocal. I always keep my lead on the left and then move over to the right. So this is constantly monitoring in from a dedicated input on my interface. I do not have that connected right now. So no matter what I'm saying, it's always coming through on this lead, and then I've got this EQ'd in like a very oversimplified sense. And this is just, I have this set up so that when I get to a venue, I can actually listen and then go from there and decide, you know, what are the resonant frequencies that I need to eliminate. If it's super boomy, maybe I need to roll off more of this low end, so on and so forth. So this is just like a really general, and I tend to not compress my vocal live unless it really needs it. What I like to do actually is from this lead, I will, on the interface, I will send it to another output. So it'll be like stereo laptop left and right, and that'll be all my samples, all my virtual instruments running through the left and right channel on an interface, send that to the sound guy. And then I'll actually send my vocal on output 3. Or sometimes if I have my Moog on stage, I'll send that out output 4. And so I'm actually sending the sound engineer 4 outputs, stereo left and right, a vocal, and then a bass. And then I'll let them mix those things from their vantage point, because they're in a much better position to judge what it sounds like from where they are as where I am. So I try to let the sound engineer do their job of managing the levels. But internally inside of the set, if you're going to do live looping with any audio, you know, if I have 4 vocal tracks that are all receiving audio from input 1, every time I add another vocal, it's going to create double the signal, and then triple the signal, and then quadruple the signal, right? So in order to bypass redundant signals and like over loudness, I'm going to show you this over here. So I've got, these are my background vocals. This is where I would record into. And so you can see they're in a group here called background vocals, which has a filter and a beat repeat on it. And then I've got however many tracks I want to record into. So I've got 3 low parts and 3 high parts. And then this is where the routing becomes important in order to manage the level. It says audio from the lead, which is where I'm monitoring in on my vocal. And then I have this as off so that I'm not getting that redundant signal. This audio goes to the group over here, and then I have this master fader or group fader in order to adjust the levels of all of these together. So half of it, you kind of have to go in and say, like, I want all of these to be whatever around here. And you can see I've pre-panned them. And then I have a control here to manage the overall level of them. And that's how I manage the vocal stuff, is that one's always monitoring in on the left, and then any other looping of any audio source, not just a vocal. If you're looping your guitar, you want to do it the same way, where you're using a track to receive audio from a specific track, and then record them into clips here. There's also a looper device that you can use. Is that an audio effects? Yep, there's looper, where you can actually, instead of having things separated into different clips, you can just have it on one device that it keeps going, and it's pretty interesting. I don't use looper because I want to be able to take things away and add them at my own will, and looper's like, it's a little more like a boss, like a traditional boss pedal, where you just create more layers over layers over layers over layers, like so. Anything else over there?
I'm not seeing anything right now.
Okay, cool. I'm going to show you guys simpler then, because it is boss. If you don't have the 9.5 update, we're on 9.6 now with Link. You should definitely go to the Ableton site and download the newest version of the software. Find this. Okay, so here I've just got some, this is just an audio clip of me singing some oohs, right? So I'm gonna create a new MIDI track here, and I'm gonna go into instruments, and I'm gonna load a simpler onto this MIDI track. And here's the device. So if you use Drum Rack, this should look pretty familiar, because every single pad on Drum Rack is a simpler. So drum rack is just like this gigantic multi-simpler. It's a fun word. Okay, so it just says drop audio sample here. So I'm just gonna grab that audio sample and drop it right on to simpler. I'm gonna zoom in here, and I'm just going to limit the range of this instrument to this. Ooh, make it really close and actually do a better job of making that happen. Okay. So now I'm just pressing the keys on my keyboard right now. So what I basically did is I created my own polyphonic synthesizer based upon the playback of this. Ooh. And it's actually not a synthesizer, it's a sampler. But it works like a synthesizer. So you can see the different number of voices I have here. And what's amazing about this is that previous to 9.5, this was not warped. So if I played this note up high, I played this one down low, the timing would actually adjust itself. So I just took warp off. Cool though. That's dope. So you can see one was playing back a lot slower and the other one was playing back a lot faster, and that's because they were not independent of each other. So now if you warp it, you can choose the algorithm. I'll put this on textures. So cool. I'm literally just playing like A, D, S, F, G, H, just hitting letters. And I can play back this sample as if it was an instrument. And I can actually switch the loop. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Fade it in. So it starts at the beginning and then just continues to loop at the end here. So if you get some really interesting sort of places to start and stop something. See, this is where it's starting now. And then I've got my loop brace as well. So I'm getting a lot of clicks in there, and you can just continue to move things around to see, you know, what's gonna work. And so this kind of like creative sampling or simpling, if you will create a lot of different results of that. You can slice things, you can dice things, there's a lot of different modes for simpler. And actually Ableton created 3 really great videos on the internet. So if you Googled Simpler 9.5, it would go into detail about what the different modes are inside of Simpler. But it's just really, really easy to use. I just showed this in class the other day to a group of brick and mortar students, and you know, I have them just record their voice using the internal microphone into a clip and then drop that into Simpler and then play a background vocal arrangement of themselves. And every time we do it, they kind of like their minds explode a little bit. So if you haven't messed around with Simpler yet, definitely do it. This is really useful too. Let's say if you were doing an 808 bass line and you had one kick drum. In fact, I can probably make that happen. Let's do it over here. We'll get a new Simpler. Simpler. Cool. So now I'll go grab the 808 kick that's in here. I have a lot of kicks. That's not an audio sample. It's interesting, just the click. I'll take this one. Okay. I'm just playing it again on my keyboard. But the tricky thing is here is what note is this kick drum pitched to from the beginning? So now there's another audio effect in here called tuner, which is really useful for this. I'm going to put tuner on the end. And I'm going to play middle C. So what is middle C on my computer keyboard is the question. It should be A. You can see it's actually F sharp. The tone of this kick is actually at F sharp. So if I want to play it on my keyboard, it's always going to be transposed. What is that? Tritone. So I need to make it. I need to get it down to a C so that I can play this on my keyboard and have it make harmonic sense to me as an instrumentalist. So if I go into the controls here, I actually have a transposition knob. So wait, one semitone, semitone, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 semitones is what I believe should be. There we go. Now we're at C. Go up an octave. Now this is C, and I can and now I'm playing an 808 bass line with my kick drum. So you can see these are a couple new and interesting applications of Simpler that I love. And I use it all the time. And I wish I had used it and known about it more before 9.5 because it's just so, it's useful in so many different respects. And a lot of times, especially when you're using software like this, it's like if you don't know about something, then you won't use it. And a lot of the MIDI effects, actually, people just don't know, especially like the velocity effect, for instance. If you're playing a MIDI piano, there's some presets in the MIDI effect. It's called velocity, and you open the presets and you'll see one for MIDI piano. And you can put those on, and it will bring a lot more life to what it is you're doing. The arpeggiator, more people know about the arpeggiator. But you can do a lot of really crazy cool things with some of these more creative devices, which is what makes Ableton special. You know, a lot of the utility things like EQ or compression, that's going to be kind of across the board on all DAWs. You'll see those things around. But things like arpeggiators or beat repeats or samplers, that's stuff that's more creative. It's not utility, and is a lot of what makes Ableton special. So I really encourage you to check that stuff out. A lot of the stuff that we went over in the course was a lot of more utility, you know, applications just in order for you to express yourself. So if you're interested in learning about some of the other names of things like corpus, for instance, is something that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense right off the bat. Go and do a Google search and watch a couple videos and see how it works and incorporate it into what you do. There's a lot out there. So you can just like slowly digest different things. Today we did a little bit of simpling, and hopefully that was cool and that you use it. And then from there, you know, you just keep on going, keep on discovering and pulling different things into your arsenal. That's exactly how I figured out how to do any and all of these things, is really just by stumbling upon them. And I continually learn, constantly pulling new things into my peripheral, because I am far from knowing everything about Ableton. I know a lot about how to use it for myself and about how it works in my workflow. And it's because of this kind of self-discovery process that I went through. So I really encourage you to do the same thing and just discover things that are interesting to you and start implementing them into your workflow. Okay, so if there's no other questions, then we'll just...
There's one more, and I don't know if you want to maybe just touch on this kind of briefly, but Israeli James asks, could you talk about how to load multiple songs into one live set? And I think that's interesting to talk about, like the philosophies of set management.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, sharing. So I'm going to go into a smaller set, and then we'll load in another one. Just do not save those changes. So you may be working on your sessions independently, song 1, song 2, song 3, and then it's time to throw in it all into this like massive live set here, right? So let's say I've got, this is my first song. Just gonna add some more tracks here so we have some space. So now I want to go in and add in another song of mine into this. So you just have to be able to locate it first. So, you know, file management is huge. Where are those sets and how are you going to find them? So let's say I have mine on Dropbox. So I'm going to go into my current working sessions. This will be a good one. So you find it in Lime's browser here. So this is the project folder. I've opened it up. And if I open up the .als, I've actually got all of this information in it, right? So these are the tracks I want to pull on. And I'm just going to pull them over here. And it should load just right here for me with everything that I had. You can see there's the MIDI devices. I've got Corpus on the end of this chain here. Here's some drum stuff that I did, and then some audio also. So it just will populate into this session for you. You just have to go over here and grab it. And everything, like automation, you know, if it's in session view, it should be there. You don't need to go searching for it. So it's really awesome. I'll pull in another one if I can here. Oh, maybe Paul and I have something. Okay, here we go. 1.1. Ooh, that's a lot of audio. It's a lot of tracks. So even in audio 1, oh, there's only one of these. I'll pull in. Let's see if this will work. Sometimes it has to think a little bit harder than you would like it to. No, don't open that like that. Okay. So these were actually just empty tracks to begin with. But I just dropped it right onto the track and it became audio 10, which was this audio 15 here, and then Paul L, which is what I pulled in. So you can selectively choose to add different things. I think these are all audio tracks actually in this particular set. So as long as you can find it in the browser, you can pull it in. And then I would just encourage you to save as a new set, new version of this set here. And you want to have one master set for when you're performing. You don't want to have to switch over between sets mid-show. That's a very bad idea. So that's how you're going to pull different things in, and it should actually retain all the original BPM info as well. So you don't have to rewarp, you don't have to put audio effects back on anything, and you're just good to go, at least on that front. Okay, cool. So that's it for today, and I'll see you again next month for April. Time flies when you're learning about Ableton. Okay, peace. See ya.